So, I've been wanting to share this build since the start of early access. I've been playing it only this basically since the beginning of early access, and I've been trying to optimize it. It's getting to the point where I'm willing to share this with people. Please let me know what you think in the comments. So let's get to it. There's a couple of things I want to set out before we start. So I set out some goals and constraints at the beginning. I wanted to make sure that these are achieved by the build. I wanted it to be a non-meta build, which is achieved. I don't want it to be abusing Chaos Inoculation or MOM or similar stuff. So it's also achieving that. For Chronomancers, since that's the only class I'm playing at the moment, which is also achieved. Note, Chronomancers are pretty bad. I wanted to make sure that there's minimal to no swapping of gear, gems, skills between mapping and bosses or other content. I hate that type of gameplay. It interrupts the game, the enjoyment, and is just not fun. I will circle back to this point. I want it to be tanky with customizable survivability. I've achieved that. I wanted to do big damage, of course, and definitely achieved that. Can get full ascendancy, do citadel bosses and tier 15s. I am able to run those easily and probably push this further. It should be affordable and accessible for more casual players. I think it is compared to the other builds available. And it must be customizable for players because not everybody can get the same gear, same skills, same gems. So I want this to be flexible build that allows people to tweak it to their preference. So I've achieved that as well. Now circling back to the minimal to no swapping gear, I'm still in the testing phases. So this build is work in progress, but I'm kind of there, not there. So it's like a half tick. Having said this, these were the constraints I set out at the beginning, and I think I happily achieved those. So now, how does the build work? The build is very simple. You cast a fire spell, you summon raging spirits, the raging spirits die, we get energy, and then when we get energy, triggered spells get triggered. Here is how it looks in practice. So we use a fire skill. We use a fire skill, it needs to hit something, it summons raging spirits, they're gonna die, and triggered spells happen. So now, what must we have for this build? So we must have FireFlower Amulet, which costs between 50x to 1 div. You can probably get it cheaper. You need to have the Necromantic Talisman passive point. You need to have Raging Spirit, lowest level gem preferred, but I've tried it with level 8, level 7, level 9, and it works. You need to have cast on Minion Death for the comet with a comet or another skill. It's not necessary to use comet, but it's pretty much the best hard-hitting skill at the moment. And you need to have a fire skill to summon raging spirits. If we look at my gear, I will go through the gear later. You need the FireFlower Solar Amulet. You need to have a fire skill, which is the fireball, and you need to have Raging Spirit skill to summon and cast on Minion Death. And then you shoot the fireball, it summons the spirits, they die, and meteors start raining down. So there's a couple of versions for this build that I've set out. There's 3 versions that I'm kind of currently testing. The main thing to remember is that we have Blink. We can set up Blink on weapon set 2 to reduce the spirit requirements of any of these versions. So the 60 required for Blink is not necessary until you're trying to push speed clearing, going through maps faster, and just generally better mobility. It's not necessary for damages and things like that. So if you're just starting out, the gear requirements can be significantly lowered by just getting rid of the blink and setting it on weapon set 2. So there's 3 versions that I'm currently testing. The 2 with the Archmage, which I'm not happy with because it's using Archmage and it's currently the most broken way to scale damage. Otherwise, you don't really have options to scale damage as well as Archmage. But there is a non-Archmage build that I'm playing around with. using 2 cast on minion deaths. You can even put in a third, which would increase the spirit requirements by another 60. But this is a good starting point for anybody who wants to kind of start optimizing, moving things around. So a couple of things I want to point out: that clarity support gem is not a requirement, it's just a nice to have. Blink is a nice to have. The other 4, I am pretty set that they are must have. At the same time, Grim Feast is broken, so once Grim Feast gets nerfed, and it should, I think there's going to open up more space with the spirit here. Same with version 2 and version 3. We're using clarity. The main difference between version 1 and version 2 is we are adding overwhelming presence, which requires 30 spirit. So I'll showcase in the game in a minute. And then the difference between the version 2 and version 3 is that you're not running Archmage anymore, and you're replacing it with another cast on Minion Death, and then that reduces the overall spirit requirements even further, which is a much easier goal to achieve. I actually started with this version myself, got to tier 15s, and it was working perfectly fine. Just lack of damage started showing up when you reached bosses and things like that. That's where you kind of had to transition into Archmage, as you don't have any other choices. Now, let's have a look at the gems, gear, and skills, passives, and things like that. So let's start with skills. So skills, we are running Sigil of Power, which comes from the staff. I'll go through the gear after, but Sigil of Power is pretty much needed for bosses if you want extra damage, but it's also not a requirement, but it's nice to have. Mana Drain, unused. Discipline, unused. So as I'm a Chronomancer, I'm running Temporal Rift and Time Freeze, because there are just not any other better passives that I can find from Chronomancer that's useful. Time Freeze with Life Tap. Sometimes you might not have enough mana to Time Freeze. The life costs are quite negligible. About 160 health was taken away for just the Time Freeze. But this is also just kind of work in progress. So the Fireball is the first skill. It needs to have mobility for less movement speed while casting, Scatter Shot to shoot the 2 additional projectiles, Arcane Tempo for more cast speed. Cast speed is good, and then Wild Charge so that occasionally, let's see if I can proc it, that you can cast them in circles. It's not happening right now, but essentially it helps with clearing the map. It's also very heavy on your GPU, CPU, and the whole system. This is basically a stress test build, but that's the first skill. It should be lowest level. Mine is level 15. It's corrupted to get the 4th socket. I've been using this Fireball since the beginning of the game. I'm just not willing to do changes around this at the moment, as I don't like the skill itself because it's very laggy. It just doesn't run optimally at the moment. Second skill is Eye of Winter. This should be the max level you can have it. It should have Unleash, so it can cast 2 additional orbs or eyes, I guess, at the same time. We use Inevitable Critical to increase the crit chance. Then we're using Cold Exposure to apply a cold exposure when it crits, and we use Strip Away to increase the effect of exposure. We're also binding this to weapon set 1. I will explain the weapon set stuff once I'm going through the passives, but because I'm using cold exposure passives, that's why Eye of Winter is used on skill weapon set 1 and not weapon set 2. Essentially what happens with Eye of Winter, you use it, it shoots it, it applies cold exposure, it applies critical weakness, and then you can spam your meteors and destroy the target. We are then using Blink with Second Wind. so you can have twice as many cooldowns, and we're using ingenuity for additional cooldown recovery, which allows you to blink twice. Sometimes once you have the procs, I'm able to blink 3, 4, or 5 more times. It's pretty nice for movement. It's like the only good movement ability in the game. And yeah, I tried playing it without. I tried playing it with using it on weapon set 1, so I don't have lower spirit requirements. The gameplay just feels a bit clunkier and just not as enjoyable. Now we go to the Raging Spirits. So my Raging Spirits are level 4. It's running with Infernal Legion, Minion Instability, Feeding Frenzy, and I'm testing out Magnified Effect on them right now, which increases their radius. So when they get near an enemy, they basically put an enemy on fire by igniting it, and then by igniting it, the FireFlower amulet kicks in and it forces the Raging Spirit to die, giving us the energy. So now look at cast of Minion Death, the main skill. You want to make sure to increase the quality of the gem if you can. It's quite good. It increases energy gain by 20% at max quality. It's not that expensive to max quality this gem, and everything comes from it. So we're using Comet. We want the highest level Comet we can. I just got, after a fair bit of gameplay, a level 20 gem. So now the Comet is doing crazy amounts of damage. I've also just increased the quality for the gem to get the extra 2% crit. Trying to optimize and push the damage for this. Then we have Echo, Spell Echo, so that we have more Comets. We're using energy retention. I'm actually testing energy retention and impetus that increases energy gained. I think at the moment the energy retention is better because, and I'll get to it when I'm showing you my jewels, I have a lot of energy gain already, and this extra 40% is not that needed, where the 35% increase from the gem makes the total 60%. So 60% chance that half the energy costs are going to be refunded, which is about 150 energy costs. So that's quite nice. And as you can see, I already have 154 energy gain modifiers. So adding extra 40 just makes me reach 194, which is also nice. Once I find perfect jewel, I'll be able to add the 5th socket. And then I think I'm going to try running impetus, but we'll see. And then the final socket is flexible, depends where you are in the game. So I'm running skills have less costs because mana issues. It's not really needed if you have the mana on kill and other mana gems. But sometimes you can still go instantaneously when you proc a lot of the minions, Raging Spirits, that die. So what I also tend to run is considered casting. And with considered casting and completely stationary, my Comet average damage is 178,000, which is one of the highest Comets for cast on Minion Deaths that I've seen online. I'm running critical damage bonus of 514% with 52% crit chance. So I do big damage with the Comets. When they do land, they do damage. They're not weak. And that was a key thing I wanted to change. I didn't want the Comets to be... I didn't want to spam Comets. I don't want to cast 20 Comets. I want 2 Comets and everything to die. That is the goal that I've been trying to achieve. I'm also, you can see, running some Cold Pen. But that's the cast on Minion Death. Flexible, you can basically replace the last gem with many options. You can also swap the energy retention. You can run without energy retention. You can just run less costs with more damage. It's really up to you how you want to see the build perform and what stage you're at. Then we're running Archmage, the one skill that I really don't want to run, but I'd have no choice. I'm running it with Lightning Mastery, and I'm running it with Clarity for 30% mana regen. You should also increase the quality of the gem because it increases not this damage from 6% to 8%. So now I gain 8% extra damage from for every 100 mana. And I just want to point out how broken this is. If you look at my comet damage of 177,000, if I disable Archmage, my comet damage basically halves. So yeah, Archmage is very silly, but even without Archmage, my comet has reached 75,000 damage, and I'm very, very happy with it. This is not the limit. I can increase it further with an additional gem. There's many ways to push this even further. My goal is to reach 200k comets, which I hopefully can reach soon. But to do that, I'll have to use Archmage until it gets nerfed. Then we have Grimfeast. Grimfeast is the best survivability 30 spirit thing in the game at the moment. I think bar none. If you're using Energy Shield, you must use Grimfeast. It, especially for mapping or breaches, deliriums, it's just too good. It's just too good. It's not that good on bosses, which is where for bosses you could swap this out with Overwhelming Presence, which reduces enemies' ailment thresholds as well as stun threshold, which is very useful. So for bosses, if you're bothered, you can swap it out. I tend to not do swaps because that was one of the requirements. I just don't want to do this. But while I'm testing it, I'm still playing around with everything. Then we have Hyperthermia, which is also bound on skill weapon set 1. And we have Frostwall, which is also on weapon set 1, where Archmage, Grimfeast, Cast on Minion, Raging, everything is on weapon set 2. As you can see. And I'll explain those reasons when I'm going through the passives. But for Hypothermia, we're using increased support curses. Effective supported curses, we're using Ritualistic Curse for more area. And we're using Persistence to increase the duration of the curse, so I need to curse less. I only really use this for bosses. It's not really needed for anything else. But it's always nice to have. And then finally we have Frostwall. I'm using Spell Cascade, Fonts of Mana, Lightning Exposure, and Stormfire. So the reason I'm using these is because I wanted to apply Lightning Exposure, because a lot of my damage comes from Archmage, as you saw. And also apply shocks that are not expiring. So the combo is something like this. You use a Frostwall, you use Eye of Winter, and then you start spamming your things, and meteors start raining down when they die, and everything melts. That is pretty much how the skills work. Now on to the passives. Passives is somewhere where I've been doing a lot of tweaking and moving things around constantly. I change my talents at least a couple of times a day. So for my Ascendancy, it's kind of shit, but I'm running Temporal Rift, which is like the best skill for Chronomancers, and I'm running Time Freeze, because I do enjoy the idea of freezing times, freezing the boss, and just nuking it, but I would maybe want some more options than this. It's not too good. Then we're also running cooldown recovery rate for now and again. We don't really have many cooldowns. The only cooldowns we have are Frost Nova, Temporal Rift, and Time Freeze. And sometimes... Oh, and Blink. So the reason why I'm using this is essentially just for Blink. The 33% chance happens more often than not. Just like right now, I blink 3 times. I can also teleport back in time 4 times in a row, as you just saw. And that's because of that passive here. 33% chance to not consume cooldown. It does come in handy once or twice, but I just don't have a better option. Alternatively, I might want to get the quicksand, but casting is not really a problem for me. The recoup, all the recoup nodes are not that good because I'm not running any of the recoup stuff. But you could swap this whole build to focus on the recoup. However, I wanted something a bit different. And then, yeah, so for the final 2 points, I'm using Apex of Moment to make everybody slow around you. And those are the ascendancies. Now for the main tree, this tree, I've made sure to make it as flexible as possible so that you can customize it in any stage of the game from early to late. So the key notes are, if you want survivability and you're lacking shield, because I'm running energy shield, you can pick up these nodes here. You can pick up these nodes here. And you have the nodes here. You have the nodes here. And these nodes give you more than enough survivability at any stage of the game. I had this build with 7, 8, almost 9k of energy shield, and I could feel like nobody can kill me. Even if I make a mistake and I get stunned, I don't die often. But then with that survivability, you start lacking damage. So I started moving things around, and now I'm running it in this way. So key things. You want to... Oh yeah, the weapon sets. So I'm using 2 weapon sets. Weapon set 2 is where I'm doing the damage. So this is where my weapon set 2 is where my wand and scepter are. I'll go through the gear in a moment. So weapon set 2 is where I do the damages. So that's the main weapon set. So I have all my trigger, crit, and where is the rest? Crit here, crit here. So these are the weapon set 2 points. There's still some optimization moving around some points, but this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do the trigger and crit damage on weapon set 2. And then on weapon set 1, we have skill effect duration. So that's for curses, exposures, and sigil of power. We're also using this area of effect, area of effect, area of effect. Again, curses, sigil to make the area of effect larger. We're also using the exposure here, the exposure here to increase the exposure effect, and some more curse nodes here for weapon set 1. And that is pretty much it for the weapon set stuff. Now the key points. So this is the key point, Necromantic Talisman. This build does not work without this, and FireFlower Amulet. This amulet gets passed on to the minions, which are the Raging Spirits. When the Raging Spirits or I ignite anything, they die. And that is basically the main game loop of the build. So early game, you will not have as many points as I, so you will not be able to reach all these sockets. So you kind of path around it. One key thing I want to point out is the 3 points here. The only reason I have them here is because I reached a point where I had enough survivability, enough damage, but sometimes you would get stun locked into oblivion. Even though you can take 3-4 hits, you get stunned once, you get surrounded, and then you just get stun locked to death. After I've added these 3 points, I basically don't have issues with stuns anymore. And this almost permanently fixed any stun issue for me. And in combination with this point here, I used to have this point as well, but I don't see the difference with one less. Essentially, these 3 add enough stun protection for me. So yeah, you just grab all the crit stuff here, crit stuff here, crit stuff here, crit stuff here. Oh yeah, I also recently anointed this, which is an additional 45% crit damage. Yes, it increases the mana cost of skills, but the 45% crit damage bonus allows me to reach over 500 crit damage for my Comet. It allows me to reach 514%. I can even push this further. I think I could reach 600 with everything optimized fully, which would mean the damages are huge. And at 52% crit rate, every second Comet basically crits. You can summon 5, 6, 7. You summon a lot of them, so a lot of them will crit. So you get this crit bonus damage, and yeah, you do a lot of big damages. That's why the sheet damage is so high here already. So there's many ways to flex around this build. So you have more crit and defense here for early game. You don't need to path all the way out here. For example, you could skip all of this section, pick up stuff that's closer. The damage penetration here for cold resistance is good. Freeze buildup and climate change is good. There's many options to where to path. I tested this build with Arcane Surge on crit. It was nice. I had a lot of mana regen, but I'm not a Stormweaver. I don't have the same Arcane Surge benefits. It just Chronomancers suck. I believe that's it. Some of these points are not necessary. For example, here, you can get rid of these if you don't have enough. You could also move them around. At the moment, they provide a lot of value for energy, shield, intellect, which is mana. Mana equals damage because of Archmage. Also from this point, more mana, more damage. So the scaling is pretty easy. Build more mana, do more damage. That's why I used to run all these cold nodes, but they're just not necessary. They don't scale damage as well as mana does. And on to the gems. So the gems is where you can spend a lot of time tweaking, optimizing, and changing, because there's a lot of good gems out there that you can use for this build. Here's an example: spell damage, maximum energy shield, critical damage bonus, critical spell damage bonus. So this gem is great. This is kind of what you're looking for. You're looking for crit rate, crit damage, energy shield, spell damage, trigger spell damage, so meta energy gain. So here is a bit different. Damage penetration, maximum energy shield, chance to inflict ailments, which is, this build actually inflicts shock, ignite, and chill and freeze. So the chance to inflict ailments is useful for all three of those. Then we have this type of gem where, again, triggered spells, energy shield recharge rate, crit damage. Something here: cast speed, meta gain skills, energy shield recharge, and energy shield. Recover 2% on mana on kill, trigger spell, mana regen, and energy shield. So you need a couple gems like this. You need to have mana on kill, and you need some mana regen. Where you get this stuff from can be changed a little bit. So it doesn't need to come from gems, but it's quite an easy way to get 2 of these gems and kind of solve your mana issues almost all together. We have another one here where chance to shock, increase area of effect, damage penetration, and meta skills gain energy. So this is less good gem for this build because I don't really need the chance on shock, but the area of effect is nice, the damage penetration nice, and the meta skills gaining energy is also nice. We also have cold damage, recover mana on kill, crit damage bonus, mana maximum energy shield. You kind of see where I'm going with this. Again, crit hit chance, crit damage, effective auras from your skills, triggered spells deal more damage. You can essentially tweak these gems to your needs. You lack damage, you focus on damage. You lack survivability, you get more energy shield recharge, etc. This is the flexible part about this build. You can change gems and you can move points around, and you can really tailor the build to work at the given difficulty. The key gem that I haven't mentioned is the Grand Spectrum Emerald. So I got lucky with mine. I got this after I got my Ascendancy. I corrupted it and it gave me cold resistance. These gems are worth quite a few divs at the moment. They're quite good. It gives you 2% increased spirit per socketed Grand Spectrum. You can have 3 of those, so you can have quite a bit extra spirit. The only reason I have it is because I need to reach over 290, and without it, I'm at 286. So there's multiple ways to reach the 290 threshold. I did not have the other options other than using this. I would actually prefer to get rid of this gem, put in another sapphire, and get the spirit from my gear. But I am not able to find that at the moment. Oh, one more point. Eldritch Battery. So we're converting our energy shield to mana. However, we still have energy shield. So now it's a perfect transition into gear. I've been tweaking and playing around with the gear a lot as well. I wanted to avoid chaos inoculation. I wanted to do a proper full resist build that can play every kind of gameplay. So the gear is as follows. I'm using this wand. I think this wand is pretty nutty. I have not seen anything that I would consider better. Maybe I would want to replace the increased spell damage with gain extra cold damage, but it's not even necessary. The +4 to level all cold skills is huge. Crit hit chance is huge, and freeze buildup is also huge. So you'd kind of look something for this with at least 2 gain extra damages, preferably fire and lightning, because you're already doing a lot of cold damage. Level to cold skills, crit hit chance, crit damage. Cast speed is also good. More maximum mana because mana equals damage. Then we go for the Scepter. I'm using the one that gives discipline. You optimally would want something like an Omen like this. So increase spirit, mana, intelligence, mana regen, etc. So this is my other Scepter that I'm using, which gives 203 spirit at max quality, and this one only gives 186. So I'm missing a bit of spirit, which would allow me to get rid of the Grand Spectrum socket. But the mana regen I get from this, the maximum mana, and the intelligence is so huge that it actually increases my mana and my damages quite a lot. And all I'm losing is essentially the Malice, which would be nice, but that's what I'm kind of hopefully gonna get eventually. I'm collecting and trying to craft it, but we'll get there. So those are the lines you're looking for. I'll mention a couple of things to avoid later on the Scepters, because they can break your build altogether. FireFlower, so you want any FireFlower, it doesn't matter, the cheapest one you can get, because it gets passed on to the minions. Then we have Helmet. So what you want to look for is life, mana, energy shield, resistances. Essentially that applies to every single piece of gear. You want mana, life, energy, shield, and resistances. Rarity on items found is a nice perk, but it's not required. Same with gloves. Energy shield, life, mana, resistances. Boots, you want max movement speed, life, mana, resistances. Belt, same thing. Life, mana, resistances. So my belt could be better. Eventually I would run ingenuity to boost the rings, but I cannot afford it as I am not a hardcore player. And now for the rings. So this is my most expensive piece of gear that I've purchased for 1 div. It is huge. It gives me a lot of mana, life, cold damage, strength, and mana regen, as well as mana per enemy killed. This ring is just nuts. Exactly what I need. I'd like another copy of this exact ring in here. But here I also got lucky very early in the game where I had a cold and lightning damage ring. It wasn't useful for a while, but then I realized that about 60-70% of my damage is coming from Archmage, which is lightning damage. So this boosts that as well as my cold damage. So this is a great ring. I have a couple of rings that I'm running, trying around. I've got this one that's also very nice with resistances, life, mana, cold damage, intelligence. But that's basically what you're looking for. You want to cap resistances, you want as much mana for damage and as much life. And the reason you're stacking life is because I'm running Ghostwrite. So the 58% maximum life converted to energy shield is what we're looking for. Even at 50, this is huge. I only recently upgraded to this. They are not expensive, they're super cheap. And it gives you huge chaos resistance. So just this one item solves most of my chaos resistance. It gives 50 chaos resist. So I just need chaos resist from 2 items or one item and 2 gems, and I'm chaos resist capped, which is huge. It also gives energy shield, which is nice. And if you notice my energy shield, I have 3,744 energy shield. Without this, I have 0. And I have 2.3k health. So this one chest allows me to convert my energy shield to mana and then convert half of my health to energy shield. So while this works, all the energy shield passives, such as these ones here, these ones here, these ones here, they all work on what's been converted after. This is where the most survivability comes from, and you can really tweak this now. Once you get Ghost right, you can tweak how much points you put into energy shield, and you can push this to 7, 8, 9,000, even more with cheap 5-10x gear per piece. I have been running that for a long time. It fixed all survivabilities and everything. As you notice, my resistances are not yet fully capped, but almost capped, and the reason is I've been testing and changing things around a lot, and as I can't undo the gem sockets, I'm really careful not to put something in it without making sure that it's going to be in the final version of what I'm trying to do. So in theory, all I need to do is put 5% to all resists, as well as 2 gems for 7% chaos resist, and I'm fully capped on all aspects. I'm actually overcapped a little bit on some of them, but I've been running it like this and it's perfectly fine. I don't really notice a difference between 75 or 65. Rarely noticed anything remotely. Oh yeah, my first weapon for my weapon set 1, I'm using Sigil of Power Staff. So what you're looking for is as much cold spell skills and cast speed and crit hit chance. You don't really care about the spell damage, the mana, etc., because you're not going to be using this for damage. This is just for to pop off your buffs. So you would use your staff to put this, to do that, and then you swap into your weapon to do damages, and then you do damages. You could also, in theory, use a different scepter with skeleton minions, summon the skeletal minions, poke them in the ground with, I don't remember the name of the skill, and then get your spell power boost there. But I think Sigil of Power is just straight up easier. You drop it, it's huge area, and I can run around this and like do damages. At the moment, in the current version, and like I said, this is work in progress, I have 3.7k energy shield, about almost 1k life, so that's about 4.7k survival EHP. It's kind of lowish at the moment because I've been trying to push the damage even more, so I am starting to notice an extra death here and there. But when I was running this without, for example, without running convert all energy to shield Eldrick's battery, I had about 2.5k 2.3k mana and about 5k shield, and at that point I wasn't dying. So you can really change it, move things around and fix whatever the problem you're experiencing at that point. Oh yeah, I also have the enemy critical damage bonus, which comes from this talent point here, as well as reduce critical hit chance against you. So these are both act as offensive and defensive points. But you shouldn't be really trying to get hit to begin with. And we have a bit of armor. It's pretty useless. It comes from the ring and the boots. Not that useful. Mana, so we have about 354 regen. We also have about 400 mana per second when we're standing around our ice wall, which is quite a lot. It's not enough to sustain us, but for boss fights, I think it's reaching the point where it's kind of enough. It really depends how many meteors you're spamming, etc. So at the moment, I'm not too happy with the energy shield recharge per second and delay modifier. Once I had the 5,000-6,000 shield, I had about 1.2k shield per second with no delay. That was really nice, but that required quite a lot of points invested into the defense. Again, then your damage suffers. So it's all about making the right trade-offs. Now, regarding the different versions. So one of the versions for the build actually requires you to run something like this, where you gain an additional skill slot because you run out of skill slots. So if I wanted to run overwhelming presence as well as all the other skills, I need to use one ring that gives an additional skill slot. So it's a hard requirement. So it would look something like this. Replace one of your gems with this. Then you replace your ring with this. Then you get rid of your clarity here. And then you have, I'm missing one spirit. Oh, yes. So this is the other 69%. There we go. So I'd have to swap this out. And suddenly I have 47 spirit now. So I can put overwhelming presence and I can put clarity in it as well. So I have both Grim Feast, Archmage, Raging Spirits, Blink, everything active at the same time. I still have a bit of leftover spirit, 7 spirit left over. And I have full skills, so I don't need to do any swapping of gems, any swapping of anything. This works fully. But in order to run this version of the build, you need to have Scepter that gives you at least 60% increased spirit. So by just gaining extra few spirit points, I lose so much mana, so much intellect, so much mana regeneration. My mana regeneration went to 263 from 325. That's huge. Same with my ring. I kind of lose a bit of damage and a bit of mana. I gain a bit of cast speed, which is fair. I'm also still almost res capped, fully res capped with this ring. So this is the other version. I've yet to decide which one is the better. Overwhelming presence is kind of must-have in breaches and deliriums, but everywhere else I don't really see it that much use. And the fact that I'm sacrificing so many points in order to get the extra spirit it's also the costs. These gems are not cheap, so I'm not sure if this is the right route for optimization in the future, but it is one way to run this build that's different, that's fully squeezing out the max spirit possible from you. So now that the gear is over, let's have a look at common issues and pitfalls. So there's quite a few things that can go wrong with this build. For example, Raging Spirits not dying, unable to ignite Breach Delirium, Expedition mobs. That's where Overwhelming Presence comes. Stun lock to death. So as I've explained here, just get these 3 points. You get life, mana, energy shield, all useful. You could also get these points here. You could also get, where are they? You can also get these points here. There's many ways to get extra stun threshold. There, I think it's here as well. Notice recharge rate. But once you get a couple of these points, it's more than enough. Stun lock to death done. For the unable to ignite, Overwhelming Presence, fix that. Raging Spirits not dying. That is something that can often come from a scepter. So for example, this scepter here. This is a pretty nutty scepter that meets the requirements of what I needed, of 60 spirit, so I can reach the spirit cap that I need. It gives me maximum mana, it gives me strength, which gives me health, as well as helps me reach strength requirements, as well as intelligence, which is more mana. So and this is a malice. So this is huge, huge, huge. But notice the line, allies in your presence regenerate 30%, 30 life per second. A tier 10 roll into the one of the worst mods that I can have for my Raging Spirits. Because with this, if I just replace it, notice that my Raging Spirits are not losing life and they don't die. And with this, if I do the same, where is it? Yeah, they're losing life and they die and they explode. So if your scepter has allies in your presence to regenerate health, yeah, you can't use that. It basically nerfs the build into the ground. There's a couple of other lines. I don't see if I have any examples. No. Like maximum minion life is also bad. There is a couple of other ones that you don't want. Essentially, you don't want to boost your minions' health, regeneration, or defenses. There's a resistance roll as well that you don't want. So it's quite hard to find one that gives you all the mana, all the spirit, mana regen, intelligence, strength. That's what you're looking for. If your minions are not dying, check your scepter. See what's happening there. So that's that. So that's for Raging Spirits not dying. So for mana issues, we have rings like this, where we have mana regen, mana on kill. We also have the same mana on kill on gloves that you can have. You have mana regeneration on your scepter. You can have mana regeneration on your wand. But I think the best way to get it is through recover 2% mana on kill. At least 1-2 of these gems is going to be more than enough. But then you're going to start having mana issues on bosses, which is where stacking mana and mana regen really comes in play. You want at least 300 plus, depends how much total mana you have, of mana regeneration, which is why avoiding Mind Over Matter, which is broken, is also good, which is what I've been trying to do, because this halves your regen. So it would go from 13,300 to 6,666. It's good. You have a lot more defenses by using your health as mana, your mana as health, but the recovery rate and the amount of comments that you shoot is just gonna mean you're always out of mana, which means out of health, and it does not work. So mana issues, damage issues. So I've encountered multiple times where I ran out of damage or my damage wasn't enough. The best way to fix it is to get more damage scaling. Put cold damage on your rings. That's big damage increase. Put more points into crit rate, crit damage. Put more points into cold damage. Put more points into elemental damage. You could even run this node, circle of nodes here, which is about 90% increase in damage because you're constantly igniting, shocking, and chilling. So there's many ways to scale the damage. It depends on how many points you have, what your gear you have, but that's how you scale damage. You can also look for cold penetration. You could also get these points here that do a lot of damage increase. There's a lot of damage here. I just tried testing this nodes here with increased critical damage bonus, which is huge. Big damage increase here as well. Then you can just path 2 more points to get another socket. I used to have 1, 2, 3, 4 for this socket as well. You kind of want to get as many of the sockets as possible because they give such huge bonuses. One good jewel can give pretty much more benefits than 4 points. So for example, these 4 points will give me a socket, where 4 points normally can give me, maybe here, like will give me a lot of shield or something like that. There's more shield here and stun recovery. But in order to get more damage, you can just basically rearrange some of these points, move the survivability into damage and vice versa. Depends what you're struggling with. The points here, cold spell skills, freeze buildup is also useful, but that's how you scale your damage. And if you focus on your crit rate, crit damage, you kind of universally have that damage across the board, so it's useful for other builds, not just this. Your gems, the ones with the triggered spell and meta energy, also increase a lot of damage, so meta skill gain energy is huge damage increase, but it also costs more mana, so you might want to find a balance between too much energy gained and not enough mana. Finally, survivability and getting one tapped. So this is a common issue early game, especially when you just reach maps. And the best way is just to put more points into energy shield. Just get all of these energy shields here. Then you get these ones here, and you get these ones here, and you pretty much sit on like 6-7k shield, where even if you get stunned or if you make a mistake or you run into some kind of on death effect, you can often survive it, but with just enough HP to like blink away or time temporal rift back. So having a lot of shield is actually really useful with temporal rift, because once you go back in time, your shields get reset to the previous version. And if you have Grim Feast and you're mapping, you can get, I had shields of 13,000 shield. I run into on death explosion. I almost die. I time travel back and I'm back at 13k shield. It's pretty nutty for defense. There's not much you need to do for defense other than that. Get some points into stun prevention. You can also get freeze threshold, so you'd stop getting freezed. Then depending on what you do, you change your charm. So I'm using the freeze charm because I'm using the stun points, but I could swap it around and use the stun charm and put the points in the freeze. Really depends on up to you. And yeah, I believe this is it. I hope you enjoyed this long rant, and leave in your comments if you'd like to learn more or if anything is unclear. I'll try to reply to most comments. Peace.